Your son argues with everything you say. Every conversation feels like a fight. Most fathers see that and come to the same conclusion. He's becoming disrespectful. So they get stricter. They push harder. They try to take back control. But what if that isn't the problem at all? What if your son isn't deciding whether to obey you? He's deciding something far more important. And until you understand what that is, every argument will keep leading you in the wrong direction. The hardest part is that getting stricter often looks like it's working. The arguments stop. Your son says, fine. He does what you asked. The house goes quiet again. And for a moment, it feels like you've taken back control. However, something else often changes at the same time, quietly. He stops telling you things before you have to find out for yourself. Conversations become shorter. Opinions disappear. Questions stop. Instead of bringing problems to you, he starts keeping them to himself. From the outside, that can look like maturity. He's finally getting it. In reality, many fathers are left with a relationship that feels strangely distant. Their son is in the house, but somehow no longer fully with them. Modern fatherhood doesn't make this any easier. We're told to set boundaries, stay firm, and be consistent. At the same time, we're warned not to be too harsh, too controlling, or too demanding. Fathers are expected to lead, but they're given conflicting advice about what leadership is supposed to look like. So when arguments become more frequent, most fathers reach for the only tool that seems certain: more rules, more consequences, more control. Not because they're trying to dominate their son, but because they're trying to prepare him for a world that won't lower its standards simply because life feels difficult. That's why this matters. Every father eventually reaches the moment where he has to decide whether to tighten his grip or change something else. Most believe those are the only two options. But what if both choices are built on the same misunderstanding? Because if the arguments themselves aren't the real problem, then every attempt to solve them could be pushing the relationship in exactly the wrong direction. But here's where it gets interesting and also complicated. Because if becoming stricter was really the answer, we'd expect the arguments to disappear and the relationship to grow stronger. Yet that's rarely what happens, as you know. Most fathers can point to the exact time their son started doing what he was told, while somehow feeling further away than ever before. That's where it stops making sense, because this isn't a new problem. Fathers have been raising teenage boys for thousands of years. Different cultures, different religions, different languages, different ideas about almost everything. And yet, across history, the same challenge keeps appearing. A boy reaches adolescence. He starts questioning, pushing back, testing limits. So why did some fathers move through that stage with their son's respect intact, while others watch the relationship slowly become a constant struggle? Modern psychology has noticed something strange. Historians notice this too. Many historic cultures that had almost nothing else in common appeared to share one assumption about authority and fatherhood that many modern fathers never hear. They had earned their son's respect through something else completely. They held firm standards and maintained clear boundaries no matter what. They earned respect from their sons who still challenged them at every stage. They seem to understand something about the way young people respond to authority that changes how you'll see every argument from now on. The question is, what did they see that we're still missing? Because if they were all pointing toward the same answer, that's probably where we should start looking. So the first clue came from somewhere unexpected. Developmental psychologists noticed that something changes during adolescence. Younger children often accept a parent's authority without thinking much about it, and as we know, teenagers don't. Instead, they begin sorting the world into different categories and applying their own judgment to things. Of course, some things still feel like a parent's responsibility to them: their safety, morality, protecting the family as a rule, etc. While other things suddenly become theirs and theirs alone. What clothes they wear, the music they listen to, and above all, how they spend their free time and with whom. The desire for more independence was familiar, nothing new there, and every generation of teenagers goes through that. The real surprise was the question behind that independence. Does Dad actually get to decide this about my life or not? That question changes the entire argument. He isn't simply resisting the rule. He's deciding whether his father has the right to make the rules anymore. And once you notice that happening, countless conversations at home start looking different immediately. The second clue appeared decades earlier. Researchers comparing different parenting styles kept finding the same pattern. The fathers who produced the strongest long-term outcomes weren't necessarily the strictest. They were the fathers whose standards made sense to their children. They expected a lot, but they explained why. They stayed consistent. The rules didn't change with their mood. That raises an uncomfortable question. If strictness alone created influence, why would explanation matter so much? Then another clue surfaced. Across adolescence, something else begins happening. A teenager becomes remarkably good at spotting inconsistency. He notices when a rule applies to him, but not to everyone else. He notices promises that aren't kept. He notices standards that quietly change depending on the day. Adults often dismiss this as arguing. Researchers noticed something different. Teenagers become unusually sensitive to fairness above all else, which makes another piece of the puzzle fall into place. If fairness suddenly becomes more important, then every disagreement may be about more than the disagreement itself. One final clue connects everything. Psychologists studying adolescence describe these years as the beginning of a much bigger task. A child is gradually becoming an adult. That means he can't spend the rest of his life accepting every instruction simply because it comes from someone older, even his father. At some point, he has to begin deciding which authority deserves to be followed and which doesn't. That doesn't automatically make him rebellious. It makes him a judge. And suddenly, every argument between father and son starts to look less like a battle for control and more like an evaluation that neither of them realizes is taking place. All the clues were pointing to the same thing. So what do we do now that the story looks different? The arguments were never the real story, and it was never what was going on. Your son isn't deciding whether your authority exists. He's deciding whether your authority deserves to be followed. That's the move that's happening inside their heads every day during those teenage years. Fathers don't lose influence because teenagers suddenly become rebellious or disrespectful. They lose influence when their son stops believing their authority is fair, consistent, and trustworthy. Once you see that, the arguments stop looking like acts of defiance or disrespect. They become moments of judgment, and you aren't the judge. And the moment you realize and see that, fatherhood starts to look different. The danger isn't that your son argues with you. The real danger is when he doesn't. The danger is assuming every argument means you need more control or he's disrespecting you. Sometimes the strongest thing a father can do is pause before tightening the rules and ask whether his own actions make those rules worthy of respect. That question can feel uncomfortable, and looking in the mirror isn't easy. Modern life constantly pulls fathers in the opposite direction to their sons, with more distractions and less time together. Under those conditions, consistency can quietly disappear before anyone realizes it's gone. Which means the real question at home is no longer, how do I make my son obey? It's, what is he learning about my leadership every time we disagree? Because every disagreement is shaping far more than that moment's outcome. It's shaping whether your influence grows or quietly fades. And once you realize that, the next step becomes surprisingly clear. So, the next time your son pushes back against one of your rules, resist the urge to win the argument or put your foot down immediately. Instead, ask yourself one question before you respond. If our roles were reversed, would this still feel fair? Not easier, not softer, fair. If the answer is yes, stay calm and hold the line. Don't apologize for having standards. Teenagers still need fathers who lead. But if the answer is no, if you've been inconsistent, reacted out of frustration, or expected something from him that you don't expect from yourself, realize it and say so. A father doesn't lose authority by admitting he's wrong. He gains credibility by doing so. Because every time your son sees that your standards apply to you as much as they apply to him, you're teaching him something far more valuable than obedience or I'm in charge here. You're showing him what legitimate leadership and fatherhood looks like. And years from now, when he's leading his own family, that's the kind of authority he'll remember. If you'd like to understand another hidden law that shapes the relationship between fathers and sons, watch the next video. It explains why some sons stop talking to their fathers and what they're actually trying to say instead. Thank you for watching.